Taking it to the streets, daily protests challenge Donald Trump's election and policies. What do these demonstrators hope to achieve? Is Miami-Dade a sanctuary city?
No, we're not.
Are those without documents safe in South Florida, officially or not? We'll take it to the roundtable.
I think the Republican Party needs to listen to what Donald Trump's been saying.
The Trump administration starts to take shape, and it is leaning hard right. Where is the diversity he promised?
Good morning and welcome aboard. We begin today with a focus on the protests, daily demonstrations since the election of Donald Trump.
Those involved are certainly exercising their constitutional rights of free speech and assembly, but what do they hope to achieve? What are they doing other than blowing off steam? Students in Homestead skipped classes to show their disapproval of Donald Trump's victory and his tough immigration policies. Many of these kids are the sons and daughters of immigrants, some of whom are undocumented, and they are afraid of being deported. Students at Florida International University held a protest rally this week. Same thing also at the University of Miami. They say they reject the president-elect and oppose his choice of Stephen Bannon, the alt-right leader, as a senior policy advisor. So let's talk about all of this with our guests.
Saul Aleman was the organizer of the demonstration in Homestead, where students actually walked out of class. He was born in Mexico, brought to the U.S. as a child, is undocumented, and so has a personal stake in the president's immigration decisions. Kison Golovkina helped organize the protest march in Miami, where a couple of thousand, a whole mass of people eventually blocked major roads and highways. And Robert Sutton is the chair of the Broward Republican Party and a Trump supporter from front to back. He was a delegate last summer at the Republican National Convention. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
For being
here. Great to see you come in. Good to see you after last summer. Bob, Kison, let me begin with you. You and about, what, half a dozen of your friends, colleagues, organized this march in downtown Miami.
Correct.
About a week or 10 days ago.
Correct. So we don't like to think of ourselves as organizers. We're just the coordinators because the people are the ones that called for the event. We just wanted to make sure it's a nonviolent, unified action that will lead to a certain purpose. So that's why we stepped up.
And what is the certain purpose? What was the goal of your march?
So lately, people have been feeling that the only voice they have is on the streets, and we wanted to start with that. Now, our next goal is to encourage people to voice their opinions in local elections, local governments, meetings, sit-ins, and that's the point we're trying to get across, that they do have a voice.
So interesting that you say that you were organizing, but how do you keep, we've seen so many of the protests across the country turn violent. How do you as a facilitator stop that?
Well, it's all about spreading the right information, and you do have to get a momentum going. Once it starts, once you tell people that we're trying to be a reasonable voice and we don't want violence, we want it to be as powerful as possible, and that's where reason steps up and violence does not work.
Well, if I may ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
If you can organize or coordinate all of these people, which, you know, obviously freedom of speech is a strong Republican value, and we definitely commend you to do that. What if you were to take and coordinate and organize these people to where they were helping build homeless, homes for homeless, or feeding people that needed fed, or working with students that needed help in schools, and make a true positive impact and go back and help other people that need help? With all the ability and talent that you have, wouldn't that better serve your message?
I think that, if I may say something, I think that there's already a lot of people in place, and a lot of people definitely who we've been working with are more than willing to do these service projects and definitely give back to the community and render services that are absolutely needed. But I also think that that a service that we can bring to the community is change, right? And we do change through resistance. We do change through organizing ourselves. We do change through thinking about what is right and what is wrong, and then moving forward with a strategic plan.
You know, can we just drill down into the goals? Because you had talked about some very sort of broad-based goals. I know, Saul, I'm going to guess that the goal of your particular protest has to do with immigration policy. But are you protesting the election results? Is it your contention it's not valid?
Listen, there's a lot of people that do have the opinion that the system is rigged. You know, it needs to be changed.
Donald
It's not about
Trump
me.
said it was rigged.
It's sure he did. Many other people did, and that's for the nation to decide. But our main point is that we actually legitimately fear for the future of the country.
Excuse me, what is it that you fear? Is it the immigration policy, national security? I would like to ask you both. What is it that you fear under a President Trump?
Okay, honestly, there's two things. The topmost thing is only during his campaign he managed to spread the acceptance of outspoken racism. It's already taken hold. That's huge. They're already talking about a Muslim, a Muslim sign-up list, registry? Registry, thank you. That is ridiculous. That is something on the lines of, 1940s. But, and the second thing is the environment. So already he plans to de-rig the Paris Agreement, and that's frightening. What happened in Fiji, they had a meeting talking about the disastrous consequences of global warming. They're inviting Trump to come visit himself and see for himself what's happened over there. And he already, he's planning to de-rig the whole agreement here in the United States, and we're scared.
Bob, so much of the rhetoric of the campaign, we're already seeing Donald Trump, President-elect, dial it back a little bit. Does the GOP, does the party, does the President-elect hear these protests, hear this fear, and is it incumbent upon the President-elect to come out and say something to address those who fear these things?
Well, I don't see where the fears are really found. I mean, we're all sitting here, and obviously if anybody needs my help, I'm willing to help them. I think that there's a rhetoric out there that's pushed, by the media agenda, okay? And
don't kill the messengers.
Yes, I hear you. My job, my one and only job, is to make sure that this constitutional republic stays open for business and that each and every American citizen has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we go back to the basic foundations, we're all on this one barge together. And if we don't learn to work together, it sinks. And there again, if you want to talk about Donald Trump and his election, this man had the Democrats as an opponent. He had the Clinton machine as an opponent. And I know you don't like this, but he had the media as an opponent and a few Republicans. He won against all odds. Big time.
I want to tune into that. I actually don't agree that the media many times was against Donald Trump. I actually think that the media fed properly into Trump and gave Trump the visibility that he needed to reach the audiences that he did. So I actually don't think that a lot of these forces that we think and that we see are against each other are actually in a greater cooperation with each other for another agenda.
The media question, I have to say, some of us here particularly personally take offense at that because because we, I think, try to be exceedingly fair at Local 10. So, the big broad brush, just as an aside, isn't working for us here.
It's not homogeneous.
But I just want to bring up that Donald Trump actually favors the ability to protest because he himself was calling for protests back in 2012. I guess my question is, does he have a role in being, as he said, I'm going to be the president for all? What would you advise him to do?
I think the largest protest took place on Election Day. He won. And the people's voice, when they stood united, gave us a president that will represent all of the people. I mean, I've met Donald Trump. I've spent time with him. I've spent time with his family. Very, very gracious, humble individuals.
So you don't share any of the fears, anxieties that Kison or Saul has?
No. I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here, and I'm obviously I'm a Republican.
Absolutely.
Obviously, I was a presidential delegate. I'm also a chairman. Okay, and I'm going to say this to you: unless you're committing crimes, or unless you're harming other individuals, I don't know where your concern is coming from.
Okay,
we all want safe streets.
Jump into that really quickly?
Please.
So, I think that it's interesting to say that from a perspective of privilege, right? You are not undocumented,
what
right?
Privilege?
Whether you're an undocumented person or whether you're a citizen. Now, in the United States, you're a citizen, right?
Yes.
So I'm undocumented, and 2 days ago, my work permit expired. That program right there is in jeopardy, right? For example, and it's not even about myself.
What have you done to correct your undocumentation?
I think that that's another misconception that's spreading around, right? So a lot of people go ahead and say that you need to get in the back of the line. Well, that line many times can mean 30, 25, 40 years, right? And a lot of people don't talk about that line. So then there's a lot of people in countries that are fleeing violence, extortion, rape, and fleeing to the United States. Those people don't have 25 years to wait. My mother, when she gave birth to me at 15, I was diagnosed with anemia, right? We don't have 30 years to wait in this line to get to the United States.
If I may interrupt here, you were born in Mexico, came here at the age of 3. Now, are you registered as a dreamer when the president 4 years ago said, we are going to have something called DACA, and I'm going to have an executive order protecting kids brought here as minors by their parents who've been raised as Americans? You're going to be protected as long as I'm the president?
Right, so that program announced in 2012 was an initiative that Obama announced to protect certain undocumented youth in the country.
And did you sign up for it?
Yes, I signed up for it, and that's actually what I was just sharing, that my work permit through that program has expired. So officially, you know, yesterday and the day before that, I couldn't go to Miami-Dade College to tutor where I usually do accountancy, right? So all of the contributions that immigrants have been giving in this country seem to be taken for granted. So what we're starting to visualize here with the Movimiento Cosecha and with the coalition at the national level is like, what does it look like, you know, for immigrants constantly being seen as a problem? What happens when 11 million undocumented people and their allies are friends, right? So I think that what happens if they go on strike for a week, right? I think that would definitely answer Donald Trump's concern of whether immigrants are a problem or a solution to this country. We
are going to take a quick break. We have to hit some commercials right now. If you stay with us 2 minutes, we'll pick this right back up when we get back. Promise.
No.
Welcome back. Live in our studio on this Sunday morning, we are talking about anti-Trump demonstrations with Bob Sutton, chairman of the Broward Republican Party, Saul Alaman from Homestead, and Kison Golovkina, and I think I've got that right, Kison? Good. So, Kison, I just need to ask you a question that I've heard a lot of people ask me, and that is, they see the demonstrators out in the streets. Many of them are young people. And young people, 18 to 25 or so, are the people who vote least in this country. So let me ask you, number one, did you vote? And do you think most of the people who are demonstrating actually went and cast a ballot on November 8th?
Yes, I did vote. And I'm sure some people have voted in the crowd. Some people have not voted. By the way, let me remind, when you were speaking about Bob, that the people chose Trump, and you know that's officially the results. 74% of people, of registered voters, did not vote. So let's start with that. But regardless, the feeling on the streets now is that we're in trouble, and what people are organizing to urge to act from a local level. So what our point now is to get people who have, become disillusioned that the politicians will solve all the problems, to convince them that it's their responsibility as citizens of the United States to go to local governments, local meetings, and to make policies, be heard, make their opinions be heard. And that's what we're trying to do with these protests, to give people a voice and to encourage them to be part of organizations.
They had a voice when we voted.
I understand, but
if they chose not to use it, that's not on the Democrat Party
some
or
of them
the
did not
Republican
vote,
Party.
but remember that some of them did. And I'd like to remind everyone that the four-year election is not the only election. There's also elections every 2 years where we elect congressional, senators, the district elections, and that's the important stuff, because that's where you elect your local officials, and that's the people who will make your voice heard.
The government closest to you is the one that in many ways matters most to you. I would point out, just to be a little fact checker here, that in Miami-Dade County, 72% of registered voters voted. In Broward County, 71%. So in other parts of the country, the turnout was lower, but the turnout here was, I think, relatively was good.
And I have a question. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you've been here for a few years. Okay, what have you done to legally put in legislation that would allow you to become an American citizen?
Me personally? Okay, so it's story time. When I was in 10th grade, my mom and dad had already been in a petition through my uncle, and so they were kind of adjusting through that, but this is the way that it works. The petition itself took about 3 years. Then it was accepted. It goes to the National Visa Center. Once we get to the National Visa Center, we find out that for Mexico, the Visa Center moves 1 month every month of every year. It has priority dates. On the priority date on which it was December the 31st, 1997. It was October 15th, 2008. So it would move 1 month every month of every year to finally get to my priority date. From there, you enter a 10-year bar, right? So that's about 13 years, 10 years, 23 years, plus the 3 years of the petition. That's about 20 26 years, right? So then from there, after the 10-year bar, you're allowed to come into the United States, and from there you start a 5-year period for you to get your residency. That would be the waiting time, but immigration and the system is very intelligent because you're no longer eligible for the petition once you exceed 18 years of age in my petition, so I'm not even eligible for that.
There is no doubt that the immigration system is just a bureaucratic mess at the moment. I think that's by all accounts. I just want to ask Saul one thing that I want to hear you talk about is when you listen to President-elect Trump right now, who says clearly the criminals are my targets, the 2 to 3 million criminal, illegal people here, which the Homeland Security says there aren't that many, but that's an aside.
They say 800,000.
Factually.
Do you sort of take solace in the fact that the campaign rhetoric was just that, and that this president-elect is not going to be targeting people who were brought here like you by their parents, who are adding to the community and a productive citizen?
I think that we don't need to see what a Donald Trump presidency will look like come January. I think that the effects are already there. They're real. The morning after the election, my little brother would not let go of my mom's hand, right? She's 10 years old. He had to go to elementary school, and he knows his mom's undocumented.
But who created that frightening experience for him?
The Trump rhetoric and the people who support him and the people who do not stand on the right side of history, right? Those people.
Yeah.
And so,
Bob, you mentioned that it only makes sense to protest if injustices already are going on. We don't want to wait for that. People are scared. So many people are scared. I'm an immigrant too in the past, and we're just scared. We don't want to wait for that time.
Well, I'm sitting here. I mean, are you guys afraid of me? Think about it.
You're
I'm
a
here.
scary guy. I know.
Obviously, I'm.
I think that the problem is bigger than you, right? I don't think it's just you. I think that it's a
But you have someone here that's
people.
listening to you. Do you fear me?
Right, and President Obama listened to us as well, and he still deported 2.5 million people, right? I'm not necessarily standing here as a Democratic person or a Republican person. I'm here to talk about the issues.
The one thing that we have to agree on, this is the greatest country that God has ever brought forth, and we all want to make it a little bit better for ourselves and for everybody that's on it. And the only thing that I'm asking you, and I know you were brought here as a child, so it's not, you're not your fault.
Right.
But legislatively and legally, what are you doing to get it corrected? So if you want to stay here, you can.
Well, they are in the streets is what they're doing. I mean, they are taking their concerns visibly into this program this morning. We're very glad you're all here to talk about it. Bob, let me just sort of get to a very basic question. I have some friends. I was at a wedding over the weekend, and a couple of people said to me, look, those people in the street, they got to get over it. Trump won, and they just, they can't accept it, and they can still work for policies, but get the heck out of the street. Now, would you agree, or do you feel that way?
I'm a big believer in everybody has a right to voice their opinion. Republicans believe in freedom of speech, obviously. Okay, Donald Trump has brought back freedom of speech to this country, and that's one of the reasons he was elected. I think the way it goes about it, your actions and my actions are why Donald Trump got elected. They don't want the streets shut down. People want to feel safe in the streets. So what I did to get him elected, and what maybe you did, also got him elected. People that live here want to feel safe. They don't want people coming in that are criminals. Okay, they want freedom for everybody, and this country is based on immigration policy. We will have the First Lady. Think about it. You want to talk about an American story, an American dream. I mean, look at the new First Lady that we have in the White House. She wasn't an immigrant.
That's a double standard, because at the same time she's taking Michelle Obama's position, so that goes with the rhetoric of
she's not taking Michelle Obama's position.
And also just speaking on facts, right?
That's not the case. Come on.
All right, so think about this as well. There's like this fear that people have been feeding into, right? Donald Trump has been pointing the finger. Oh, well, Muslims are the problem, immigrants are the problem, black people are the problem. Well, I don't several people are the problem.
Look at Dr. Carson and Donald Trump.
Right? I think that you do not have an immigration problem today. There are more people being deported or returning back home than there are people coming in. That's a fact. So we have a negative influx of immigrants today.
Before we, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but on, aside from the immigration-specific issue, Kison, I want to hear you answer the question that's sort of on the table. Is there a thought to all of these people who are now part of the American electorate, whose president-elect is Donald Trump, to get over it is kind of a glib way of saying it, but join in and making whatever comes next a team effort? Is there any sort of thought process there?
First of all, we're not people on the streets. Not all of them are Republicans or Democrats or Bernie, pro Hillary. No, we're not against you. We just ask you, you are on Trump's team, so to speak. We ask you to stick to your morals, whatever happens, stick to your logic, whatever happens, and we ask you to do what you do, safeguard the republic. That's what you do, right?
Well, I'm hoping, with me sitting here, put some of your fears to rest. I mean, I know that Republicans, people still look for their horns and tails. We're really not like that. I mean,
I'm quite sure that's not true.
We believe in the American
dream. I don't know
dream.
anybody who's looking for horns and tails. We're looking for reasonable discussion between civil people, and we've had it. So, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for
good luck
us,
with your status, and Kison, thank you for coming in. Really
Thank you so much.
appreciate
Stay in
it.
touch.
Thank you.
It was nice meeting you.
All right, after the break, we are going to take this and the President-elect's new cabinet appointments, so much more, yes, to our Powerhouse Roundtable. All right, time for some analysis and informed opinion on the week's top news stories with our Powerhouse Roundtable. We've already started, really. Thank you for joining us again here.
We are so out of control. Some introductions. First, H.T. Smith is a Miami attorney, civic activist, and law professor at Florida International University, and the only one not wearing purple today. Katie Fang is a former prosecutor in both Miami-Dade and Broward and an attorney with the Berger-Singerman law firm. And Jessica Fernandez is the president of Miami Young Republicans and was a delegate at the GOP convention in Cleveland. Does consulting and lobbying. And hello, everybody.
Morning.
Hi.
All right, we've already started, so carry on.
Well, I think the first question I have is, we know now, the nation knows, the first three cabinet high-ranking officials of Donald Trump, and they are obviously Michael Flynn to be National Security Advisor, Representative Mike Pompeo, head of the CIA, and Jeff Sessions to be the Attorney General. Now, HT, Mr. Sessions was rejected by the Senate when he was nominated to be a federal court judge because, among other things, he called an opposing counsel who was African American a boy, and he has made a few other statements in the past, but it's a checkered record. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let the audience know that I did not get the memo to wear purple. It's not like I'm just being a contrarian. But obviously, Jeff Sessions, especially for African Americans, is a very disturbing choice. In 1986, the Republican-led Senate rejected his appointment to the district court, United States District Court, basically on the allegations that he was a racist. And now, 2016, back then he was a racist in Alabama. Why would you put him over the national justice system? Because people are going to believe it's an injustice system. I have seen nothing in this record except one thing that went against the grain of that, and that was the 100-to-1 ratio for crack cocaine. Right. But one, he's been strongly against criminal justice reform, and he prosecuted 3 civil rights leaders allegedly for voter fraud. 14 ballots out of 1.7 million ballots. Thankfully.
And he lost the case.
He lost the case because it was unjust.
Right.
I'd like to hear what my Republican friends have to say about that.
Well, at the table, I think, Jessica, that might be something you want to address.
So,
is it fair to have that opinion after 20, 30 years? Do people change, or is this valid? Right?
Look, I think that he's being judged based on some comments that were said many years ago, and I think these are political appointments, and so people are allowed to have their opinions on these political appointments. He served in Alabama with a lot of distinction, and I think he's extremely qualified. I mean, I think to go to the point about the racial tension, I mean, he also was supportive of the Fair Sentencing Rights Act. He was also he also prosecuted and bankrupted the KKK in the state of Alabama. So I think that we need to weigh things appropriately and realize that, yes, this is a political appointment, so it's fair, to attack him, but it is a political appointment. So I think that he's a qualified person to serve as AG.
Katie, we should also note that subsequently, Senator Sessions sponsored a bill to award Rosa Parks a congressional medal. So his record is not quite as clear-cut as one might think.
He has a long and storied career of service. I do find somebody's track record and their history to be disturbing if it is going to reflect personal animosity towards people of any race, ethnicity, etc. But he's going to be the top cop. He's going to be the Attorney General of the United States. And any prosecutor, including myself, we're charged with the responsibility of following the law. And there are consequences when we fail to do so. So if he's going to promote laws, they're not going to be his laws. They're going to be the laws that are being provided by Congress, by the legislators. And so because of that, there are safeguards in place to make sure that those laws are followed. Now, then what happens thereafter? We now, of course, still have a strong Republican president.
And as usual, Katie is right with regard to the laws. However, the enforcement, civil rights will not be aggressively enforced under Jeff Sessions. And to those of us who happen to be people of color, for those people who are LGBT, for those people who are handicapped, that is a travesty to know that those laws will not be, they're on the books, but they won't be enforced. All he has to do is change the priority. He can go after other people, and that's what has happened in the past, and it's sad. It's sad.
Does anybody find any sort of optics in the fact that the first number of people who the president-elect is appointed, being Bannon, General Flynn, Pompeo, these are white men? Where is the diversity so far? And I know everyone says sit back, he's just begun, but for someone who said, I'm going to be the president of all people, are you, Jessica, are you troubled that the first number of appointments are all white men?
No, I'm not. I mean, I think Lieutenant General Flynn, he also served under the Obama administration, so I think that he's showing that he can work with all different types of people. I mean, we need to relax. This is the first couple of appointments. There's many appointments that are to come. Okay, we've heard, we've heard kind of put out there we might have the first openly gay cabinet member. We're definitely expecting some women to come up there. So I think we need to be measured.
Take a
calm.
breath.
Yes, absolutely. This is just a couple days. It hasn't even been 2 weeks since the election. So we need to give time for Trump to unveil his cabinet positions. I think we need to be critical when that time comes. But I think we need to give him a chance to put forward his team and then have something to say when something doesn't go the way that we think it should.
May I agree with part of what you said? I think that we're jumping the gun. Look, most Americans are white. We expect white men to probably dominate, but there can be gays and women and African Americans later. But it's not too late to assess who the white men are. With regard to Lieutenant General Flynn, I know and I love and respect General Colin Powell. If you remember, his emails were hacked. And General Powell said General Flynn, 1, does not listen to anybody, 2, was fighting against the policy of the administration he was working for, 3, was incompetent, but 4th and most important, he said, my fellow Republican is a right-wing nut. I don't know if it's true, but I believe Colin Powell.
Yeah, well, Colin Powell has authority. Katie, yesterday, a very curious optic, as they say in politics. Mitt Romney went to New Jersey, where Donald Trump was at his country club, and they had this meeting. And I mean, if you talk about cognitive dissonance, here's the man who called Romney called Trump a con man, a phony, a fraud, unqualified to be president. Now they're not exactly buddy-buddy, but they're shaking hands and they meet for 90 minutes. What do you make of this?
I think that revolving door at Trump Tower got worn out, and that's the reason why they had to meet over at the country club. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric that is expressed during a campaign, and I think that's everybody's waiting to see kind of what HT was saying and as Jessica's saying. There's a lot of rhetoric that's expressed during a campaign, what actually happens to the policies that are enacted and implemented once somebody actually takes office. Mitt Romney would be a spectacular selection for Secretary of State. I think he'd appeal to those of us in the Republican Party that were Jeb supporters, that were Mitt supporters, that were John Kasich supporters, that are looking for somebody who's quote-unquote a little bit more moderate. So is he perhaps throwing a bone to some members of the GOP that might be looking for it? Maybe, or maybe he's actually considering thoughtfully somebody who might be able to do this.
Today, we should say Mr. Trump also is going to meet with Rudy Giuliani, who, when I interviewed him last summer at the convention, really made no bones about the fact that his desired job is Secretary of State. So we'll see.
John Bolton's name's also been mentioned as well. There's been several people.
Even Nikki Haley, although I think
I think she's out now.
Something else.
No, this is a perfect example of people underestimating Donald Trump. This was brilliant. Most communication, people don't understand, is nonverbal. Here is a man that called him a fraud and a phony, coming to the throne Trump-owned property and standing side by side. And this is what
just the picture itself.
This is what he said non-verbally. Here is Mitt Romney, a loser who snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Here I am, Donald Trump, a winner who snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. And the loser is coming to the winner's throne to bow at his feet, to kiss his ring, and beg for a job.
Isn't that
this
I
is
don't think he's begging for
yes,
a job.
this is
I think
brilliant.
he's gainfully employed. I think he's okay. But
No, he's not gainfully employed as one of the most powerful men or positions in the world, Secretary of State, and you know he wants it, or he wouldn't have showed up.
All right,
Brilliant.
it was a brilliant strategic move. Hold your thoughts, gang. We're going to be back with more Roundtable in just a minute.
we are back with Jessica Fernandez and H.T. Smith and Katie Fang on our Rockin' Roundtable, and Hamilton the musical on Broadway we all wanted to see. Mike Pence, the Vice President-elect, saw it on Friday night. A lot of cellular phone video of him walking in and getting cheered by some, booed by some, but at the end of that production, the Hamilton cast had a message for the Vice President-elect.
We truly hope that this show has inspired you to uphold our American values and to work on behalf of all of us.
Boy, has that become controversial. Some say it was very disrespectful. It was obviously planned, and some call it just a really nice, respectful message to the Vice President. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it was an ambush. I think Mr. Pence and his family really looked forward to being able to see a Broadway production that has had a lot of recognition. And I think it was a missed opportunity for the Hamilton cast. I think if they wanted to communicate their message and their fears, their wants, they could have pursued an avenue, or they could have pursued a private audience with Mr. Pence. I think to have lectured him from such a perspective, I think didn't do service to what they were trying to communicate, the Hamilton cast.
So you see it as a lecture.
I thought it was a lecture. It was like trying to explain to Pence something, and I just didn't think that was a proper way to do it.
And yet Mike Pence today says he told his daughter, this is what freedom looks like. So it's interesting because Trump is all PO'd about it, and he's tweeting,
on Twitter.
I'm angry rants. And then Mike Pence says very graciously,
it was rude.
yeah, Trump's demanding an apology, but Mike Pence very graciously says, thank you, and this is what freedom looks like.
Would there have been an opportunity, HT, for the Vice President-elect to stand up and graciously respond?
Yes, but I don't think that's Mike Pence's style. And you got to remember now, he was there with a loved one and his family who really looks up to him.
Yeah,
and I think he did the right thing. I think the message was right. I think the place and time was not right. And I think you do a disservice to the cause when you really, I agree with Jessica, it's ambush. I'm trying to think of President Obama and Michelle Obama and their daughters going to a function, and someone who...
Well, they saw Hamilton, and the cast did not come out and say anything. All right, I want to, if I can, I think that we all are talking about essentially how divided this nation is and the ongoing dialogue sometimes it takes to the streets. But there was an incident in Miami this week where a building contractor went into a Starbucks, didn't get his coffee on time, and got really PO'd and blamed the barista of discrimination, and called her disgusting, and it was a pretty a vile situation. Later he said, I'm sorry, I had a bad day.
And then after he said, I'm going to sue.
Now he says he's going to sue Starbucks.
Yes.
Isn't that how everything ends in a lawsuit?
Well,
don't blame the lawyers.
For the lawyers, that's great.
Totally blaming the lawyers.
Well, first of all...
Sorry, that was me.
Okay, first of all, I think that this guy's a nutcase. I don't want to necessarily pin on Trump or the Trump people what a nut does. I mean, he's absolutely a nut. However, with regard to the overall look of the protests and things that are happening in America, there are people who are frightened and say, you ran a racist, bigoted, divisive campaign, and this is a shot over the bow. We will have an enemy in the White House. We cannot win in the Senate. We cannot win in Congress. So we're going to do like black Americans did. We're going to go to the streets. They're always open and available to us. The same thing that people in Venezuela are doing. And I hope for my Cuban American friends, one day the same thing that Cubans will do, rise up in the streets, because they have no other place to go. And so this was saying, hopefully you will change as president. But if you don't, in issues of bigotry and racial prejudice, we will fight you and face you to the gates of hell.
So I don't think anybody is under any pretense that Miami is known for its great customer service in restaurants. So I think that, but I think that we need to. I think we all need to calm down. I think this gentleman completely overreacted, and I think that he should have never attacked the Starbucks worker. I think it was in extreme poor taste. I think that, we all need to, take the chip off our shoulder, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Hillary supporter, and realize we're all Americans. We all want the same things. So, I mean, when you go into a Starbucks and your coffee doesn't come in on time, it's not because somebody's against you because of who you voted for.
This guy, John Sangüesa, did not have a sign around his neck saying, I voted for Trump. He had a sign on his truck, but the barista, a young Hispanic woman, said, I had no idea.
But the only reason it's going viral is because of the divisiveness right
Correct.
now. That's the only reason, because if not, it would have just been a really kind of episode in a Starbucks one morning, but it's because of the anti-Trump idea. That's the only reason why people are paying attention, and it's going viral.
And that everyone has a cell phone to take video, and they send it to the news.
There you go.
Before, in the short time we have left, Michael was with Miami-Dade Mayor Jimenez this week, who said we are not a sanctuary city. Sanctuary city being those cities where undocumenteds can be safe from police and federal law enforcement. And, HT, my biggest question is, obviously, this is a community with so many people undocumented and Miami-Dade County has a policy of not turning them over to federal authorities. But the question I have is, when is a sanctuary city official and when is it unofficial, and is there a difference?
Well, clearly there's a difference between de jure sanctuary city and de facto sanctuary city. And look, in Miami, you just had someone on your program who just said, I am undocumented and my legal papers have expired. Now, for a person to have the courage, what makes him feel that they're not going to come for him if he can say that, except the feel that I'm in a sanctuary city, I'm safe. I don't think he'd say that in Arizona.
So then to the Department of Justice that clearly thinks this is a sanctuary city, is there a legal standard by which they can address Miami-Dade County or
it
any
made
others?
the list. I mean, the Department of Justice has identified Miami on the list.
One of the 10 major cities. Actually, there are 300 communities, but Miami-Dade is one of the 10 big cities.
But it's major city. And the problem is now there's this threat that the funding is going to be pulled from these cities. But anecdotally, and I usually don't do this on the show, my first homicide I prosecuted as a Miami-Dade Assistant State Attorney was a 3-time deported illegal who had re-entered the United States, killed someone, and was fleeing to Mexico again when he was caught by Miami-Dade homicide detectives. That was my first homicide. And so when it comes to criminal illegal aliens, I gotta be honest with you, I don't have a problem with the deportation rules. I don't.
If I can, before that's a stunning story. Before we end this part of the discussion and the roundtable, I want to say Miami-Dade Police Director Juan Perez said, we do not do the work of federal police agencies. But if we pick up somebody who has broken the law, we find out he is an illegal immigrant and he's committed a serious crime, we give him to ICE. So it's not as if there are illegal alien criminals simply going through the system with impunity.
And we need people to know that there's an economic reason as well.
Correct.
Miami's not being reimbursed with the way they should be reimbursed.
The jail costs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all. Great roundtable. Appreciate it. Get you back here soon.
Thanks so much.
Well,
in purple.
In purple. We'll give you the
Red
memo.
next time. We'll do red next time. Coming up next, it's almost 2 weeks since Election Day, and one of the races for a Florida House seat is technically still in limbo. The recount of District 118 is next.
This week, the results of 2 recounts determined that Democrat Robert Asensio won the seat in the Florida House in District 118 in Miami-Dade. He got just 53 more votes than former Congressman and former State Representative David Rivera.
But even before that hand recount that you're about to see was complete, Rivera disputed the results.
One by one by hand. They're counting more than 6,000 ballots that the machines couldn't read because of overvote, undervote, no vote, even a no written in for both candidates.
Percentages are so close that we have to do a manual recount.
The frontrunner by a hair, Democrat Robert Asensio, examined the process, as did Republican opponent David Rivera. The first machine recount showed just 50 votes separate them, an 1/8%. That triggered the second manual recount.
We had a good lead of, I think it was about 1,700 votes in early votes. So I'm feeling very confident that that's going to show up today on the recount.
Watching democracy in action can be tedious, but the drama of this race cannot be overstated. A win by Democrat Asensio, this one Miami-Dade House seat, would deprive Governor Rick Scott of veto-proof Republican majority for any law he signs. David Rivera, former Republican congressman and former state rep, embroiled in former campaign-related scandals, is already planning the next level of contesting the results, a committee of the Florida House, where election law enters the realm of party politics.
The legislature can take any evidence it wants into consideration. So all of that evidence, not just on mismatched signatures, but also on omitted signatures. So there's about 250 votes that haven't been counted that the legislature can look into.
And this week, the State House will appoint a committee to consider Rivera's appeal. He says he has affidavits from voters affirming their ballots that had signature issues, which would be enough votes to sway that election.
It's going to go on for a while. All right, still to come, my personal perspective about a high honor for one of South Florida's very best, Dr. Eduardo Padron.
Florida, happy Sunday. It's been a gorgeous day so far, and it's going to stay like this, no doubt about it. Mount Sinai Medical Center tower cam showing you that, well, there's blue skies, and that's it. Not a cloud out there. Temperatures now warming up into those low 70s. Winds picking up as well. It will be breezy for the rest of this afternoon. Winds could actually top 20 miles per hour by the middle of today. Highs today, 77 degrees. Tomorrow's morning low, 59 degrees. So make sure you wear the sweaters early tomorrow morning.
Jennifer, thanks. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about some good news about one of South Florida's most outstanding people who's going to be honored at the White House. Dr. Eduardo Padron, president of Miami-Dade College, learned late this week he is the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That is the nation's highest civilian honor. It's well-deserved. President Obama will give Dr. Padron and 20 other high-achieving Americans the medal on Tuesday at the White House. Late this week, I sat down with Dr. Padron, asked him about getting the award and about his remarkable tenure at Miami-Dade College.
I think that someone like me, I'm an immigrant who came to this country with nothing, will be honored by the president of the most powerful nation in the world. It's a great thing. And I am so grateful. We have a notion of education that is very embracing. We have the notion that education is not just what happens in the classroom with the teacher and the students. We have a much broader concept of education culturally. For example, at this time, the book fair. This is education at its best.
And this is the final day of the book fair. Hope to see you down there this afternoon. And I will be in Washington on Tuesday to report on Dr. Padron getting that Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mazel tov.
A warm congrats to Dr. Padron. Hey, we would love to hear what you think about anything in the news. Love to hear your perspectives, even your critiques. And here are all the ways that you can find us via email, Facebook, Twitter, you pick it.
Well, any of those addresses, get in touch with us. We'll be in touch with you. Remember, stay informed, get involved.
Have a great Sunday.